our esteemed elders to speak.
Please do.
Well, hello, my name is Dr. Tiffany Porter. I am the the General Assembly Chair for the Association of Black Psychologists, and I would like to welcome you to our second Mbongi of today. I want to give a little bit of background about the Mbongis for those of you who are new and a refresher for those of you who are returning. So historically, the Mbangi assemblies were responsible for into the community. They conceptualized the idea of a community of thinkers and activists having the responsibility to care for the welfare and well-being of its people so that we can plead our case. Specifically, conversations are designed to capture, critique, and clarify those things which concern us dearly. We honor the core meaning and purpose of African American and Black people, that our collective truth and collective reality is reflected in our spiritual, intellectual, social, and artistic memory and creations. As such, the Mbangis are incorruptible. Therefore, the Association of Black Psychologists must continue to create space to capture, critique, and clarify those issues that concern us dearly. I would now like to welcome our moderator and introduce him. We have Michael Oyeteju, who is originally from Houston, Texas. He is currently our Student Circle Southern Region representative. He is also a PhD candidate in counseling psychology at the Tennessee State University. He has earned his master's degree in psychology from Houston Baptist University and his bachelor's degree in psychology with the minor in criminal justice from Sam Houston University. His clinical and research interests are related to family systems, multiculturalism, racial ethnic minority psychology, performance psychology, and career development. And with that, I welcome you, Michael, to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Porter, for that introduction. And before I begin, in keeping with tradition, I would like to ask the elders for permission to speak. I think that was a go ahead. So before we hear from the panelists today, I want to note that the purpose of ABSI is to host diverse voices. As such, those on the panel today, so that the listeners may make informed decisions. Additionally, the Black community is not a monolith. So as such, we can hold diverse perspectives without judgment. I would begin my introduction of panelists with Dr. Griffin. Dr. Griffin is a 25-year professional academic and has done research, academic clinician, healthcare administrator, and community thought leader with targeted populations. The second panelist for today will be Dr. Cambone, who is a licensed African Center psychologist in Raleigh, North Carolina, specializing in children, adolescent, adults, specializing with children, adolescents, and adults. The third panelist for today is Dr. Thompson, who is an associate professor in the Department of Microbiology at Howard University. The fourth presenter for today is Dr. Cook, who is a professor of counseling and psychology and clinical coordinator for the Graduate Mental Health Counseling Program at the University of the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. And our last presenter for today will be Dr. Mitchell, who is Detroit clinical traditional naturopath and herbalist. And to close things out for today, we will hear from Dr. Cooper, Elder of Elder Emeritus, who is a licensed psychologist and former assistant clinical professor. So let me suggest that each panelist has 10 minutes to make their comments. And I just ask that you keep your slide presentations to 5 to 8 slides limit. So with that, I would like for Dr. Cook to start us off for today, please, if you are ready, sir.
Yes, share screen. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. I'd like to first ask permission from one of the elders to speak. If I could have permission.
Speak.
Thank you. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
So I'm speaking on this Mbongi. I'm honored to be here with these distinguished panelists to kind of engage in what is defined as real talk, COVID vaccination in Black communities. I'm gonna begin by helping us recognize that it's important for us to have a context. When we talk about a pandemic, we're talking about a worldwide epidemic. And if you go through history and look at the 10 worst pandemics throughout history, one of the things that you find is that the majority of them were based on influenza. While probably the one that carried the most deaths was the bubonic plague of 1346 to 1353. Clearly, the pandemic of the influenza that's often referred to as the Spanish flu in 1918 had a death toll of 20 to 50 million. One of the things that becomes real important is that scientists in moments like this have to find ways to remember their obligation to tell the truth, not to manage the truth. So what I want to do is I want to share some information that is what we might say hot off the press from the CDC that looks at some of the impact issues of COVID-19. Now, if you look at the general population, I'm just going to speak to what's highlighted. There are elevated levels of adverse mental health conditions. Among those, anxiety disorders are on the increase, depressive disorders are on the increase, there's increased substance use, and serious suicidal ideation and suicide is on the increase. This next slide that I have for you is to also recognize that if you look at COVID-19 and what is basically presented, that we now have life expectancy on the downturn. In this slide right here, there are two different pieces. One, life expectancy at birth, the other, life expectancy at age 65. In both instances, one of the things you see if you start at the top, total population, Latino population, white population, Black population, unfortunately, as they say, white America has a cold, Black America has pneumonia. We are severely impacted by this to the extent that we're beginning to see a significant decrease in overall life expectancy just over this period of time. And we're also beginning to see it in terms of those who are older. This is another slide to kind of give you another piece of information on this. One of the things that's interesting here is these are trends in life expectancy at birth, looking at race and ethnicity from 1980 to 2020. And you see that the projected drop-off is more severe for the Black community than any other community. So again, why do we need to know about whether we should engage in vaccinations? Real talk, look at the data. If you look at this next slide that I have here, another life expectancy due to COVID-19, this is kind of looking at it from a perspective of from birth on. And we're beginning to see a tremendous drop in what's happening with life expectancy. One of the things that I'd like to add here is that, again, I'm going to focus on what's really highlighted, is that mental health conditions are, without question, disproportionately affected by COVID-19. We see it in young adults, we see it in Hispanic or Latinx, we see it in Black, primarily because many of them are engaged as essential workers, unpaid caregivers for adults, and those receiving treatment for pre-existing conditions, both psychiatric and medical. At the same time, we also see that this adds to an increased risk of severe illness as a result of those who actually are infected with COVID-19. So what can we do? Well, there's several strategies that have been laid out by the CDC and other agencies. Identification of the populations that are at risk. Well, we know we're at risk, but one of the things that becomes important is providing a voice for those who feel like they don't have a voice to do that. So we need to reach out as much as we can to the community. In some cases, those who are not low wealth have greater access to telehealth, but we have to find somebody needs to mute. Okay, we have to find a way to provide services for those who do not have access to telehealth. It means that we have to look for delivery of treatment in those places and spaces in the communities where people can know where they can come to receive services. That means that we have to have community level intervention. And most of the intervention needs to really focus on not only being able to look at preventative strategies, but also community strategies that focus on the promotion of health services. We need people who are able to engage with being culturally sensitive, but also have cultural competencies to effectively engage those who are at risk. So culturally and linguistically tailored prevention messaging becomes really important. We need to look at ways that we can engage in periodic assessment. Oftentimes, if this doesn't come from the family, it comes from people in the neighborhood or people from the community. It could come from people who are connected with churches, people who are connected with social networks, whatever the case may be. We need to find ways to address the needs of the people, which also means that we have to become, as professionals, social engineers. In that context, we have to work outside of the silos that we've been professionally trained in to recognize the importance of engaging in issues of governance, because part of the issue for the disparities and the inability to receive services are the ongoing disparities that have been ongoing in the community for some time now. So what this means is that we have to recognize and identify the impact of triggers. For the most part, most of what people have been experiencing have been triggers for not only longstanding mental illness, but longstanding trauma and longstanding abuse. We have to recognize the impact of cultural mistrust. It's not that many people in the African American community do not want services, but they know that we have been abused and mistreated in the name of medical services. So as professionals or practitioners who are providing services, we have to make sure that we understand the history so that we can help others to recognize how that history impacted, but the things that we can do to begin to make changes to create greater trust in terms of services that could be delivered. We also have to identify those issues of systemic and institutional racism and oppression that accounts for poor care. It's not somebody's imagination. They're not hallucinating. They're not delusional when they tell you the things that they know are happening to them that impact their lives. We have to share culturally salient, epigenomic, generational healing strategies to also enhance mental health. And this has been an area where I've been engaged in research, looking at and understanding that health factors and social factors at critical developmental periods impact us at an epigenomic level. While the DNA pretty much phenotype kind of speaks to who we are that's been passed down, there are chemical tags on top of that that act like an on-off switch that can cut on hereditary illness or cut it off. But recognizing how we deal with that covers many areas. I just want to share a couple here. One of the areas that my research is really focused on with the Black community is improving mental health by recognizing that we are what we eat. So looking at foods that are high in vitamin D help with the production of serotonin. Serotonin and norepinephrine are those neurotransmitters that play a critical role in our mental health. So foods like salmon, sardines, tuna, egg yolks, mushrooms can play an important role. But we also need to look at foods that are high in magnesium. Now, just to pause for a second, one of the things that becomes important is in providing services is helping the client recognize how to move towards optimal health, meaning that it's more than just a talk therapy or medication. You have to also add the social network in, especially if it's culturally relevant. You have to look at medical approaches to treatment. But at the same time that you're doing that, you also have to understand how even at the epigenomic level, it impacts all those other systems. So foods that are high in magnesium help with anxiety and depression. It could be something like avocados, nuts, seeds. Many people are familiar with lentils, beans, chickpeas, and soybeans. That's a part of their stable. Help them understand why it's important. You know, salmon, mackerel, halibut, bananas, and leafy greens also become important. And then one of the things that I often will talk about is the foods to say yes to and the foods to say no to. So we want to say that yes to the foods that help to increase good gut bacteria, okay? And I've listed those there. In the sake of time, I'm going to continue to move forward. 2 seconds left. We want to say no to these foods. We want to say no to processed foods, pastries, fried foods, foods with white flour, candy, refined syrup, sodas, because they cause inflammation. In that particular context, the processed foods, it's important to remember, are devoid of any vitamins or minerals. They are foods that are composed of artificial dyes, preservatives, and synthetic nutrients. And this does not help in terms of sustaining any good mental health. Sugars in foods cause inflammation at the cellular level. And at the cellular level, they then impact at a neurotransmitter level, they impact even at the epigenomic level. So in that particular context, studies have shown that sugar leads to increased risk of not only depression, but also Alzheimer's. So you want to include foods that basically have complex carbohydrates, lean proteins, healthy fats, and vegetables and fruits. Can't go wrong doing that. So coming to an end, over the summer, I had an opportunity to read this book, and I'm going to recommend 3 other books in just a moment. But this one really helps you see that many of the things that have happened in the past, we're reliving all over it again because we have not learned from the past. So one of the things, and if we're going to talk about real talk, COVID vaccination in Black communities, we have to consider the history of influenzas and what we know about COVID-19. We have to consider the impact of influenzas on the health and mental health of Black and brown people. We have to request and support culturally salient research on the science of vaccines and other treatments. For psychology, we know we have the Association of Black Psychology. For psychiatrists, we know we have an association for them, but we also need one that's made up of people who have studied genetics and can help us understand the impact of this on the epigenome. And then we have to base any final decisions we make on whether we want to pursue vaccinations on our own pre-existing health and mental health issues and on our own pre-existing health and mental health conditions. And then finally, 3 books to kind of help you along to really understand the issues around cultural mistrust. I would highly recommend the book Medical Apartheid, A Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present by Harriet Washington. I would highly recommend The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health by Rita Walker. And then I'd like to highly recommend All About Depression, 2nd edition by Benson George Cook, myself. Each of these books provides a wealth of information that kind of speaks to some of the issues that I've presented here in this short time frame that I can answer questions to at a later point. And I've gone a minute over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. And your remarks actually segue into our next presenter, who's going to go into details about microbiology as it concerns microbiology. Dr. Thompson, I invite you to share your remarks, please, if you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. And in keeping with the tradition of all of the speakers, I would like to ask the elders for permission to speak.
Please speak.
Yes, you have permission.
Okay, Let me share my slide. Okay, can everybody hear me? It looks like I was muted.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the basics of COVID-19 and how vaccines should work. So this is just a financial disclosure slide. I do not have any financial interest or investments in companies that are currently developing vaccines or therapeutic products by brand name or generic form associated with treating COVID-19. So here's the outline of my talk. I do have a little bit over 8 slides, but I will stick to the 10-minute time limit. So I'm just going to go over COVID-19 and some immunity concepts. I'm really pleased to be following Dr. Cook's presentation. He did an excellent job of discussing the public health implications as well as the implications for life expectancy in minority communities. Then after that point, I'm going to just talk about, highlight some vaccines, what vaccine should do and COVID-19 vaccine concepts. And then I'm going to review just a couple of COVID-19 vaccine frequently asked questions. So just to start, COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2. So COVID-19 stands for Coronavirus-Induced Respiratory Distress 2019, because we know that the pandemic started in 2019. So COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2, which is severe acute respiratory distress syndrome coronavirus 2. We've had a one maybe about 17 years ago in 2003, 18 years ago, actually. So it comes from the family of viruses that are known to cause respiratory distress. And we know that it can be spread by aerosol. So on this schematic here, you can see a cartoon of depicting the virus structure if you look at it under very high magnification. And then if you cut that and you look at a cross section here, you can see that we have several components, but the main components are the structural proteins, the spike protein, and inside it has its genomic information, which is different from our genomic information in the sense that the genomic information of this virus is RNA as opposed to DNA. And although this is not very common for human cells, it's relatively common for some viruses. So we have quite a bit of viruses that use RNA as their genetic material. So the virus can be easily spread, and that's true for all viruses that are spread by aerosol, as well as some bacteria that can be spread by aerosol. So a single sneeze can produce up to 10,000 droplets, and the virus can remain suspended in air in these very tiny droplets. And of course, what can happen then? Well, the virus can then spread to somebody else's airway. And let's see if we'll have a pointer here. I'm sorry, I was trying to look for my pointer. I can't. Okay, so it can spread into somebody else's airway, and then the virus can then attach to the mucus and the cells that line the airway epithelium. So one big question is, why has the global community been so severely affected by SARS-CoV-2? So we think that SARS-CoV-2 is a genetic variant of a virus that caused a previous outbreak in 2003. And it's thought that there has been a recombinant event between bat and human SARS viruses. So this results in a new virus that has not been seen by individuals or complete entire geographic populations. And as a result of that, there is low herd immunity. And what that basically means is we have a population with little to no immunity to this pathogen. And when the body hasn't been exposed to a virus before, it can also overreact while learning how to quickly incapacitate and expel the virus. And this is a type of immunity called innate immunity. And it does this while it's learning how to create a specific strategy to target the virus with pinpoint accuracy. And that is a concept that our immune system uses called adaptive immunity. And so this is a schematic that I tried to create to kind of visualize some of the theories right now behind SARS-CoV-2 evolution and linking it to the outcome. So we have this horseshoe bat, and these horseshoe bats are they are basically vectors for hundreds and hundreds of different viruses, to include coronaviruses and other viruses. So there's what's known as bat SARS-like coronaviruses. So you can see that this is the yellow virus. It has a spike protein, but this spike protein doesn't work in humans, right? But it's going to be a little bit different from the human SARS coronavirus structurally as the body would see it. And that's why I actually made some color differences here. So this is gray. And then this has a spike protein that actually works in humans. So it's thought that a recombination event occurred between these two viruses, because recombination can occur when you have similar DNA RNA sequences, and that we now have this human SARS-CoV-2, which has a relatively different structure, but it has the spike protein that can work in humans. And the reason why I made this a little bit darker green as opposed to this one is that one of the other theories is that this spike protein has also evolved to develop a much stronger ability to bind to our ACE2 receptors, which are receptors in the respiratory system as well as the cardiac and circulatory system. So you can see that some people have very mild illness and obviously recover, and other people develop severe illness. And of course, this can spread back into the community. So I wanted to just highlight this concept of accuracy and precision as applied to the immune system, because this will help us to understand both why people are getting sick and why vaccines can help us. So, as it pertains to accuracy and precision, this is a common metaphor that's used, where you see basically somebody that's doing archery target practice, and they have taken all of the arrows off of the target. And we have four possibilities here. So we have precise and accurate, where the person is always hitting the mark. We have precise but inaccurate, where the person is hitting or reproducibly hitting something that's not the mark. And then we have accurate but imprecise, and inaccurate and imprecise, where it's basically hitting places along the target but not quite hitting the mark, right? So this is an analogy to what we call, in my opinion, the innate immune system. So it requires little time or prior, and I apologize here, that should be prior exposure. But the downside of this is that it can cause disease if left unchecked, because if you think about all of these targets, all of the places that it's hit on the target outside of the main target, that could potentially be places where the body's injured, right? But you really want adaptive immunity, which your vaccine is actually going to promote, where it's hitting only the target. The immune system is only targeting SARS-2 coronavirus. It's not actually targeting ourselves. And then some of you are very probably familiar with autoimmunity or various autoimmune diseases. One of the most prevalent in our community is lupus. So this is a scenario where the immune system is actually reproducibly targeting the wrong part of the body. Okay, so vaccination is going to again be the optimal tool for controlling the spread, and this schematic just shows principles of herd immunity, social distancing, and immunization. So we have three possibilities here. We have no immunization, no social distancing. We have immunization and social distancing, and then we have immunization. And so without immunization, without social distancing, we can see that the infection is going to pass freely amongst the individuals, going to spread very fast, and you're going to have a lot of mortalities as a result. Now here we can see that social distancing is going to decrease the spread of infection, and therefore it's going to decrease mortalities associated with it. And immunization is going to also do the same thing in the absence of social distancing. So what is a vaccine? A simple definition of vaccine is a substance used to create an active immune response against a specific infectious agent. It could be a complete microbial or viral pathogen that has been incapacitated, or it could be a component of the microbial pathogen. And most of the vaccines that are created now are components of the microbial pathogens. And so how do they help us? So they help us by working with the immune system, which is part of the body, that functions to recognize and eliminate agents, infectious agents or allergens that do not belong. And this schematic just shows some of the anatomy of your immune system. So the immune system can work with or without training. Without training, again, it can mount a vigorous yet unspecific response to quickly get rid of a threat. Yet this can also harm the body left unchecked. And you may have heard the term cytokine storm associated with COVID-19. And this is, again, our innate immunity. With training, it can mount a vigorous and specific response that is focused on removing the pathogen only. So this schematic is just showing some basic components of vaccines. So you have your stabilizers, preservatives, trace components, antibiotics to prevent contamination, adjuvants, which help boost the immune response, and then your active ingredients, which are usually your viral or bacterial antigens. This schematic is showing the common strategies currently used in our COVID-19 vaccines in development and on emergency authorized use as the moment. So we have the lipid nanoparticle carrying genetic material for the S protein. We also have a adenovirus, which is encoding an S protein, and this is a defective adenovirus which cannot cause disease. And then we have basically a recombinant protein attached to a nanoparticle that is subunit vaccines, but the overall goal is the same. So we want to directly or indirectly create a specific component of SARS-CoV-2 that trains the immune system to recognize SARS-CoV-2 when it's exposed, thereby preventing COVID-19 without causing disease. I'm pretty close to time here. I have a couple of frequently asked questions, but I'm just going to go to the conclusions. So SARS-CoV-2 is a novel virus not previously exposed to the vast majority of individuals and the global population, resulting in low herd immunity. The immune system is responding vigorously as a result, resulting in COVID-19 illness and deaths. Finally, vaccination is the best tool available as a solution to address this problem by training the immune system and increasing herd immunity. And there are many different types of vaccines with the same aim to induce an immune response to SARS-CoV-2 without causing illness. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for those remarks. And if we could hear from Dr. Kimbone, I invite you to speak if you are ready.
This is a Zoom call.
Dr. Kimbone, are you here?
You're on mute, Elder Kimbone.
Yeah, her mic is off.
Okay.
Okay, is that on now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm here slightly different. As you know, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I'm also initiated as an Akomfo of the Akan traditional healing system. I'm also known as Mama Moya. And I've come to remind us so that we can remember. And there's a proverb that says it is easier for a king to have a lie believed than for a beggar to spread the truth and be believed. I'm here to remind us so that we can remember that in this 20th century, as many of you have heard, but I must reiterate, there was a Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The study was conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the United States Public Health Service and the Centers for Disease Control that included 600 Black men, sharecroppers, of whom 399 had latent syphilis. That even when they lost their funding, they did not let these men know And an experiment that was only to last 6 months lasted 40 years. Even though penicillin had been developed in 1947, none of these men were given this. So I'm here to remind us so that we can remember. So I'm going to go back a little further and remind us that there was a physician named Thomas Hamilton who conducted a series of brutal experiments on a man named Fed who had been enslaved. And that he put him in a pit over and over again till he passed out as an experiment for 2 to 3 weeks until he finally died. I'm here to remind us so that we can remember that Dr. J. Marion Sims is named by this country the father of modern gynecology, who used 3 Alabama enslaved women to develop an operation to repair vaginal fistulas between 1845 and 1849. He recorded the pain and suffering of these women, and he continued to perform on them until it was perfected. And when it was perfected, he then used anesthesia on white women volunteers. I'm here to remind us so that we can remember in the 20th century, the first compulsory sterilization law was passed in Indiana in 1907. And that the Supreme Court case, Buck versus Bell, Carrier Buck, a young white woman institutionalized involuntarily after being raped and impregnated, challenged the state's decision to sterilize her for being eugenically unfit. It went to the Supreme Court, and Oliver Wendell Holmes' famous statement says, "We have had 3 generations of imbeciles, and those are enough." And so sterilization continued. Over 60,000 people were sterilized. Nearly 5,000 of them were African American women. And even as the states began to repeal compulsory sterilization laws in 1960s, 1970s, sterilization abuse continued. And there is a book called Killing the Black Body that I recommend that we read. I want to remind us so that we can remember the courageous Secretary of Energy, Hazel O'Leary, who served under Clinton, who apologized to victims of radiation experiments of the 1940s. As many as 48 people were injected without their knowledge with plutonium, uranium, polonium, radium, thorium, radioactive lead from 1945 to 1946 as part of the Army's Manhattan Project. I want us to remember our dear mother, Henrietta Lacks, whose cells continued to serve to heal people all over the world except Black people. She was diagnosed with cancer, cervical cancer, in 1951 at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Her tissues were taken. It is not clear whether they could have prevented her death or not. But Henrietta Lacks is still in our memory. And her daughter-in-law, Babette Lacks, says that and that is known for the HeLa cell. So remind you to remember the HeLa cell and go look this up. Because it is known that in Baltimore, Black people knew in the 1950s that when it got dark, you had to go home and sit on your steps because Hopkins might get you. This was a common cry. Likewise, when dozens of Black children went missing in Atlanta between 1979 and 1981, African Americans in that city suggested they might have been kidnapped by the Centers for Disease. I remind us so that we remember. I also want us to remember recently in December of 2020, Black doctor named Dr. Susan Moore went to the hospital with COVID and put on social media that she was treated like a drug addict. Not that that was justification for mistreating anyone, but she complained of her pain. And she said that doctor refused to even touch her. And she had to conduct her own treatment there, which only dealt with reducing the pain so that she could go home and die 3 weeks later. Look her up, Dr. Susan Moore. I remind us so that we can remember. I remind us of the Strecker Memorandum. In 1983, Dr. Robert B. Strecker, MD, PhD, who practiced internal medicine and gastroenterology in Los Angeles, was trained as a pathologist and held a PhD in pharmacology. The documentation that HIV virus itself, this is his words, was not only created as requested, but actually deployed and now threatens the existence of mankind because it does what it was exactly designed to do, cause cancer in humans via a contagious virus. Dr. Strecker told the government in 1985 that virtually every person testing positive for AIDS would die prematurely and painfully. The government said that was nonsense. In 1986, the government said maybe 50% would die. In 1987, they said maybe 75% would die. In 1988, they finally agreed with Dr. Strecker that AIDS is virtually 100% fatal. I remind us so that we remember. I remind us that during the Second World War, there were chemical experiments tested on our troops. These experiments were like the mustard gas and others that made our soldiers feel like they were on fire. Experiments done by their government. The second story in this report explained that failures by the Department of Veteran Affairs to provide benefits to those even injured after the experiment. I remind us so that we can remember. In 1913 to 1951, Dr. Leo Stanley, chief surgeon at the San Quentin prison, performed a variety of experiments on hundreds of prisoners at San Quentin. Many of these experiments included testicular implants, where Stanley would take the testicles from executed prisoners and surgically implant them into living prisoners. Look up Dr. Stanley, Leo Stanley. In other experiments, he attempted to implant the testicles of rams, goats, and boars into living prisoners. Stanley also performed various eugenics experiments and forced sterilization on San Quentin prisoners. He believed that his experiments would rejuvenate old men, control crime, and prevent the unfit from reproducing. I remind us so that we can remember. There are a series of these. And as we talk about what we need to do at this time, I want us to be able to look at two particular videos that you can look up yourself. One by Congressman or Senator Robert Kennedy Jr., who talks about the genocide perpetuated by what's his name, Fauci. There was another one out. I cannot say anything about these. I just remind us so that we can remember. There's another article that you can look up on the internet called Unethical Human Experimentation on the United States. I have only touched on a couple of us because I want to remind us so that we can remember. Yes, indeed, during this time, there's an increase of mental health challenges, trauma, even suicide, because we have been moved to fear, moved to feeling helpless, moved to feeling that there is nothing we can do until this vaccine comes. Scared for our children, scared for our parents. We are moved to trust when we have traditionally mistrust with reason. So we must make changes for trust, but right now, during this pandemic, are we going to accept a remedy that has not been proven? Given the history that we know, it is not for me to say. It is for me to remind us so that we can remember. A 2016 study found that medical trainees and residents perceive Black people as less susceptible to pain than white patients. What that means is, like Dr. Susan Moore, when we go into the hospitals, we are less likely to receive the kind of treatment needed to help us. With all of these experiments that the US government has performed against its own people and around the world, as of 2007, not one US governmental researcher or agency has been prosecuted for human experimentation. The preponderance of the victims of US governmental experiments have not received compensation. So this is not just local. This is a worldwide problem. We can talk about the baby scandal from 1974 with Nestle's, done by the UN World Health Assembly under the World Health Organization, WHO. We can talk about many more. But I'm here to remind us so that we can remember to reclaim our power, to restore ma'at, truth, balance, order, harmony, righteousness, morality, and justice. It is my belief that when we remember, we will reclaim our power and restore our humanity, not only to ourselves, but to the world. I thank you for this opportunity to share with you. And please, I have come. There is a proverb that I want to leave us with that says, it is easier for a king to have a lie believed than for a beggar to spread the truth and be believed. I come as the beggar. Madasipa.
Thank you, Dr. Cambone, for the historical as well as present context when it comes to the trauma that we have experienced and are experiencing in the name of science. I've always found it helpful and very eye-opening recently to follow the money whenever it comes to these experiments. Following the money, you really can find out, what is at the root of, or who is at the root of these experiments that are being done in the Black community and abroad. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Griffin to share their remarks as we continue through this afternoon. Please, Dr. Griffin, if you're ready.
I would humbly ask the elders to speak.
You may speak, my brother.
Dr. Cambone, thank you so much for the truth and for setting things in the appropriate direction. I want to thank a few other people, elders, Dr. Inyala Cooper, for your days in educating me at Charles Rice Roof. Dr. Kenneth Montero for introducing me to ABSI, Dr. Robert Scott for introducing me to Zimbabwe, and though not an elder, but here today, Dr. Bonnie Harrison, Miss Bonnie Harrison, for teaching me a little bit more about epigenetics and historical trauma. I'm going to take a slightly different approach because I'm a trauma doc. And my relationship with COVID is a little different. Around March, I was in a trauma room pumping chests, breathing COVID. I work in a zip code, which is one zip code away from where I grew up. I saw those faces dealing with that historical trauma as their families were ripped from them and they could not get in to see them in the trauma room. And those memories of having families ripped away from them came up, and I felt that pain. I was a victim of that historical trauma myself. Before I began, one of the things I said in a joking way was that I was going to put all these letters after my name. And one of the things I know about letters is that when you get a few letters, what you do is you just give the information. I came here today understanding that I wouldn't convince any one mind about whether to take this vaccine, but let me sort of give you some information, if you will. Folks, this is an mRNA vaccine. The technology is there, but the truth is it has never been put through any pharmacovigilance studies. Those pharmacovigilance studies began the day that they released this vaccine in our community, knowing full well that the phase 1, 2, and 3 were only immediate, and they told you only about immediate and short-term negative effects, the ones that we knew. But we know, as many of us do, that Black people suffer from increased incidence of autoimmune disorders. So the idea of tinkering with immune systems is a kind of a curious thing for us. You know, we know sarcoid, and we know lupus, and we know scleroderma. And in some instances, we know that type 2 diabetes is strongly linked to factors in the immune system. We know that. I did some numbers, and I looked at a number in India put out by the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, and they're estimating that about 63 million people at the most, and about 10 million people conservatively have been exposed to coronavirus, and about 10 million of them had cases, which that's about 12%, and about 96,000 of them died. So that would mean that of all the people who got coronavirus in India, that only 1% died. So then what I did is I looked at some of the numbers on this efficacy. 99% lived, and I said, Pfizer, 95% efficacy. Moderna, a little less than 95% efficacy. And something struck me really strange about that. Because I know, Dr. Cook, thank you, that we've had these viruses before. And we lived through them. And we used natural remedies. And we made it. I'm a student at the University of Arizona program in integrative medicine. And I believe in diet. And I believe in those things that we've always done to keep ourselves well. So, you know, I have a bit of a question. And that is that with that survival rate, whether or not this vaccine is even necessary. I was one of those people about March whose immune system, Dr. Thomas, whose natural African juju, dancing, screaming, gyrating immune system did a cytokine immune response, and I lived. That memory caught me, and I lived. And I want to know now how many of us have that memory and would just live. You know, the things that we used to do. So the truth of the matter, folks, is that the studies only showed you what would happen in the short term. If you ask anyone what's going to happen in the long term to someone who has a predilection for sarcoid or lupus, type 2 diabetes, or scleroderma. They cannot tell you. So right now, folks, this is an experiment. It really is. And I told you I'm not making up anybody's mind, but people need to understand that 5, 10, 20 years down the line, our communities, because if we know our genetic predilection, may be suffering from the consequence of these vaccines. Let's hope not, but you know, we've had to trust a whole lot. We've had to trust a whole lot, and then we got hit. And many of us know. And when I looked in the faces of those patients at that city hospital in Brooklyn, they wanted me to tell them the truth. So I had to tell them the truth. We don't know. We really don't know. And so there's a thing called pharmacovigilance, and that happens after the vaccine is released and the papers are coming out. They've used artificial intelligence. I got one of them here. And shortly after it's released, MIT does a huge study, data. I'm trained in population health at Johns Hopkins, so I know a little bit about data, big analytics, the kinds of things that can get the answer, maybe the kinds of things that you wait for. And so the paper is saying artificial intelligence shows COVID-19 vaccines may be less effective in racial minorities. Particularly, they point out Blacks and Asians. We warp speeded. Yeah, we did. I don't know if I trust this guy who pushed this warp speed. I have a lot of questions about whether or not this vaccine is going to be effective in elders whose immune systems decline by 1% per year. We have no endpoint. We don't know after you get those 2 shots how long it's going to last, whether it's going to have an effect, right? How our immune systems are going to be after that. We don't know these things. And they're asking us, this people who watched them breathe on us this year willingly, just to trust them. Just to trust them. Dr. Cambone, I thank you very much. Researchers discover mutations in the TLR7 region of a gene that are associated with severe COVID-19. That came out in July. And I had a sort of a sense as we were going through, because see, I treat a lot of people of color, Black people, that it seemed to me that it was running in families, that it seemed to me that certain markers of cytokine immune response, they tested me because I was a doctor, but many of those people, we don't know. That unusual pattern of not being very short of breath, yet having a lung full of COVID and a low sat, I saw that. And I saw sons and daughters saying, she was just well last night. And that seemed very familiar to me. And I had some questions. Classical vaccines take about 10 years to develop. This we did in how many months? How many months? So what I'm going to say is that they owe us more. They need to release the data on those initial studies. I not only want to see the number of Black people in it, of African descended people in it, I want to know the number and the treatment arm versus the control. See, because I count. I count. They taught me to count real well. I think right now our answer to this, whatever the case is that we need to count, we need to be part of counting that pharmacovigilance. And we got to count a long time because we don't know what they've done. There is not a scintilla of evidence that says you will not shed this virus despite being immunized. So what you may have done is protected yourself, but killed your grandfather, whose immune system cannot take. It does not take that vaccine. And these are things that they really need to question, really need to tell you. The reason why with these letters, I need to give you the evidence so that you can be informed, not for you to make a decision either way based upon what I say, but just to get the evidence. And as I know my people will, they will check for themselves. They will wait for Dr. Griffin to take this vaccine, maybe, if he does, and see whether he dies next week. That's what my people do. That's what they do in Brooklyn. That's what they do in Watts, right? They'll wait. They're smart, right? Because we've been down this road before. So I think we have more questions to ask. I think we need to do more, but I will point you to another thing. There is a COVID-19, COVID human genetic study, 50 centers, they're doing it now. And they're finding that there is a genetic underpinning to many of this. There's this thing called the Silk Road that extends from northern Italy through northern Iran to central China, where they sold silk. And we know now the rates of coronavirus in northern Italy, in northern Iran, and in central China have a little bit to do with history and migration patterns. And what I want to know now is about Nigeria. I want to know about Gabon. I want to know about Dahomey, name change. That's what I want to know about. And I'm saying that as a person that's trained. I'm not saying that as someone who is saying this flippantly. It's real. And I want you to ask these scientists, and I want you to demand more of them. Give us that big data. Give us that artificial intelligence and that machine learning. They've got it. Harvard has got it. Hopkins has got it. My alma mater. And they need to give it to us because we are owed it. We deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you for your curiosity and your courage to challenge the powers that be, or the medical professionals, the scientists. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell, if you are ready, if you can share your remarks, please.
Testing, can you hear me okay? Awesome. I just want to say I am so elated to hear, humbly asking my elders for permission to speak. Thank you. Am I
Permission.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to hear the depth and the breadth of information that is being shared today. I am Dr. Carla Mitchell. I practice naturopathic and clinical herbalism here in Detroit, Michigan. I've been practicing for the past 15 years. And anytime I speak, I always share my story in context because it speaks to the passion that I have for my work. I've not always been or had a passion and interest in holistic medicine. I came to the practice with my own personal testimony, and that was a cancer diagnosis over 15 years ago. And in getting that diagnosis, I immediately knew that the course of convention wasn't what I wanted to do. At the time of my diagnosis, I was a senior level executive in the automotive industry. I kind of killed two birds with one stone doing affirmative action. And I was traveling the world. I was having a really good time. And when I got my diagnosis, I went to go and look in other cultures to see how they handle diseased tissue. And when I came back home, I put myself on a protocol or a regimen that lasted for about 40 days. And just to give you some context of the severity of my diagnosis, I'm a mother of 5. I, at the time, had 4 children. I'd gone into my doctor for my annual exam like all women do. And he sat me down. I went in for my annual exam. 2 days later, I got a call that he needed to talk to me. In my haste, I wanted to have the conversation on the phone. And the doctor refused, asked me into his office, sat me down in his office, and basically said, he drew a number line for me. He said, if 0 was a healthy cervix and 10 was cancer, you'd be a 9.5 today. And in that conversation, I asked him how much time did I have before I had to do any of the things that he said. And when I say the things that he said, the things that he said after my diagnosis sounded very much like the end of a pharmaceutical commercial. And so he gave me 60 days and he talked about it not wanting to be invasive into my uterus and that I had to hurry up and make a decision. And so I took on that challenge, traveled, got some information, came back home, did some remedies and protocols religiously. And in 40 days, when I went back to the doctor, he could not find a single abnormal cell. And for me, that was the impetus for leaving comfortable cush automotive and going and starting to practice on my own. And so to be clear, I am not a medical doctor. I am a clinical traditional naturopath who celebrates, elevates, and praises the self-care experience. I elevate and celebrate indigenous, traditional, spiritual, traditional African practices, herbal indigenous practices, Native American folk indigenous practices, because all those things have a place. And so I am elated to hear the nature of the conversation today, one of the first things that sparked my interest was Mr. Cook talking about the plagues that plagued us before, and me recognizing that during that time, there were natural remedies that helped to sustain life during the bubonic plague and during the Spanish flu. There were, things that sustained life during the time of the dengue fever. And so there are specific plants out there that have specific actions and constituents that help to reverse certain conditions in the body. I've been practicing for 15 years. There's not a commonly diagnosed condition that I have not cared for effectively. And I'm just happy to be a part of this group. I want to acknowledge Theopia for the invitation and for the curation of such wisdom on this day. The conversation of epigenetics was not being had a year ago. People were not talking about the fact that although the apple falls from the tree, it doesn't also have to be rotten. People weren't talking about the fact that epigenetics deals with flipping on switches and turning off switches for genetic code. And so I am here to just say, especially for Blacks and African Americans, that just because your parents had a condition does not necessarily mean that you have to have one. And so as we talk about COVID in African American communities, and I cannot help but acknowledge the esteemed elder, Dr. Cambone's exercise in remembrance. I didn't know whether to get on here and continue with my actual and I'm not, because I realized that in remembering, I have to speak to those who are affected. And then listening to Dr. Griffin talk about the fact that, having letters behind your name means that you have to give information. No, because before those letters, I am a woman, I am a Black woman, I am a wife and a mother. And it is my responsibility to care for my family and then my extended community. And in doing so, I honor my ancestors with the wisdom they have given me about plant medicine. In all honesty, my grandmother was a hoodoo woman without apology. And not that she went around shaking rattles and singing and doing dances, but she used plants. We rarely went to the doctor. She had seasonal practices. And so in saying that and in sharing that, I am acknowledging the fact that one, convention isn't the only route. And I think when we think about the questions that ABSI has raised for us as panelists in terms of how do we honor vaccine concerns in the Black community while healing from the trauma experience? Well, the first thing is to remember. The first thing is to remember, and the first thing is to stand in our truth. And that is for people who are being cared for by convention and those who are delivering service in convention. We have to stand in our truth and first honor the fact that it's distrust. It's not mistrust, because the trust is not misplaced. Dr. Cambone has just showed us that the trust is not mistrust, it's distrust. And it's for the reasons that she has described. We have had valid experiences as to why we cannot simply accept something that has not been fully investigated and the long-term effects of which have not been fully disclosed to us. And so to honor the concerns in the Black community is to first allow us to remember and to validate that remembrance and to validate those concerns. And then the second thing we must do in honoring the concerns in Black communities is to humanize the experience. Thank you, Dr. Griffin, for talking about your experience as somebody growing up in the Bronx or familiarity with the people in Watts and being a trauma professional and knowing that when people coming in, we're just different. Your patients coming in are just different. They're different than what the studies show. They're different than what the prevailing narrative often describes. And if you don't humanize that experience, you lose your ability as a practitioner to connect with the people that you care for. And that is across spectrums, whether you are a clinician who is a therapist, a clinician who is a surgeon, or a clinician who is an emergency room or trauma physician. You have to humanize the experience of the people in our community. Otherwise, they don't want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from you. And so as a naturopath, as a traditional naturopath and herbalist, I am always questioning the status quo. The first question, when somebody comes to me with that mistrust, I don't invalidate it. I, in fact, acknowledge it. And then I tell them that convention is not the only way. I am not getting the vaccine. I do not vaccinate my children, and we have been just fine. And as part of the work that I do in my everyday community, when the vaccine, as an unvaccinated woman, When the vaccine first came out, I was on the front lines. I coordinated community-based testing in the city of Detroit. And so I was in the presence of people who were actively infected and experienced symptoms. And I'm still here today, not having been sick because of my knowledge of plant-based medicine. And so I say to you that if we are concerned about honoring the concerns of Black people about this vaccine, tell them the truth. Help them to make informed healthcare choices, and let us move away from fear mongering. And while we do recognize and honor the lives that have been lost as a result of this pandemic or epidemic, it does not go without saying that there's not enough talk about the comorbid conditions, the diagnoses that preceded COVID infection that weaken the system. And so, when you hear things like people died not because of the COVID infection, but because of a secondary concern, that is enough to raise mistrust. So if we are not honest with the people in our community, we cannot expect them to follow all of the narratives that are being told. And then the other part of that is we have to acknowledge that there are multiple sources of information. And so if people are raising questions, they're also seeking answers. And if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And so we cannot misplace the fact that there is a duck and that people are seeing these ducks walking across the street. We have to acknowledge the fact that our people are finding ducks. And so let us just continue to be honest with the people in our community. And I think, Dr. Griffin, you're probably the first doctor who has gone on record and really said, like, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea what is moving forward, and you are validated in your concern. And so that's that. And so as professionals and leaders, one of the things we need to do to continue to galvanize our efforts is to know that medicine and care and healing does not exist in a silo. And that as much as we support vaccination and microbiology and immunology and things like that, there were things that came before that. And there are practices that are just as effective. And to be perfectly honest, there are people out here, including myself, doing the work and recognizing that the National Institute of Health does not put money behind studies in plant medicine. That does not make them any less effective, and it does not validate them any less. And so I think we have this widespread belief that there's only one way to address this condition, and that's just not the case. And I'm standing on the work that I've done for the past 3 years, and especially the work that I've done in recent months to people who are terrified about the vaccine and starting to open up to the possibility that there are other ways to protect themselves. And so here I would say, if we look at an approach to caring for those who are still on the fence, that just because they're not getting the vaccine does not mean that there aren't solutions, because there absolutely are solutions. And I will go on record and say that there's nothing wrong with deferring the decision. There's absolutely nothing wrong with deferring your decision to get vaccinated. And I would encourage you to not do it out of fear. Another thing that I think we need to understand is there's something greater at play. Especially listening to Dr. Cambon as she talked about all those experiences, there's absolutely something greater at play. And I don't know if this is the arena to get into it, but as professionals, we need to continue to have this conversation. We need to continue to talk about those elements of this entire pandemic that raise even greater questions about the sterilization or the sterilization of women, or the sterilization of Black men, or the genocide that occurs with widespread vaccinations and the creation of disease, and the studies that come out of other countries around the construct of this virus and the mechanisms that operate within this virus that are similar to other viruses. And so, and let us not ignore the federal indictment, of professors at Harvard or students who were found trying to take the virus out of the country. I mean, there are all these things that are a dynamic, and then the prevailing narrative that we want to push in Black communities is that you should just get the vaccine because you guys are the most people dying. That's just not our truth. It is simply not our truth. And so a couple of things I want to share in terms of what we should be doing as people who are still on the fence. There are absolutely reasons to know that you should be protecting yourself. And so one of the things that I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, the microbiologist talked about in terms of the mechanisms of how this virus attacks the body. We know that the spikes on the virus are the part of the virus that tries to attach to the tissues. And so some of the simple things that you can do is to ingest something like ginger every day, because ginger has a constituent in it called gingerol that inhibits a virus's ability to attach to your tissues. And so pairing that with something like a black seed tea, not an oil, a black seed tea also helps to inhibit the virus's ability to attach to your tissues. There are tons of herbs and supported studies in application, community-based participatory research, and practice that show that there are plants that not only address active infections, there are plants that absolutely and effectively address preventive mechanisms for not catching the virus. And there are also plants out there that are absolutely effective in dealing with all, not one, all of the aspects of post-COVID syndrome. And so we're still waiting to see the outcome of the infection, let alone the outcome of the vaccine. And in doing that, we have to believe that Earth has given us everything we need to survive through anything that it throws at us. And so I just want to be a testament to what believing in the power of plant medicine can do. I want to be able to stand here as a person who is non-conventional. I'm a non-conventional medical practitioner and say that there are methods that are as effective, and waiting and seeing is also an effective strategy in the pandemic. And so, again, I think we've done an exceptional job here today with the panelists covering all the aspects. Mr. Cook really, did an effective presentation in terms about, diet and nutrition, epigenetics, the social justice aspects of health equity and health literacy, something that we don't spend enough time advocating as practitioners and professionals. Giving people the information that they need is important, is as equally important, but also standing up and objectifying those narratives that perpetuate fear-mongering. I think that we need to continue to do those things, take our position and stand up. My work is primarily focused on primary care, integrated behavioral health. These are not the conversations that they're having. And even beyond integrated, we're not where we need to be. Integrated is just bringing primary care and behavioral health under the roof. Integrated is very different than integrative. And that's another conversation that needs to be had. And so as we are sitting in these spaces and being vocal about the things that matter to the people in our community, we have to remember to stand firm, because if not, you'll be usurped by the prevailing narrative. And that's just not, I have not heard that on this call today. And I'm so pleased to be a part of this panel. And I'm so happy that we have such a breadth of information to share with people, because these are not the conversations that are happening in convention. It's just not happening. It's just not happening. And so I thank you for your listening ears. I am available for inquiry, further discussion. I'm an on-demand speaker. And so you can find me at adosedoctor.carla.com if you want to continue to have the discussion. And I'm also happy to share specific remedies with people about, specific formulas with people about how to preserve their health and promote longevity in the course of this pandemic until you're able to decide what you're going to do going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, about increasing our awareness of different remedies that we can use to improve our health outside of the conventional medicine that is, prescribed to us. With that, I would like to invite our scholar elder, Elder Cooper, if you are available, if you can share your remarks and close, well, not close us out, but share your remarks as our last panelist for this afternoon.
Well, my apologies for interrupting, Michael. This is Ethiopia. Actually, if we could take a few moments to get a few questions in, and then that will give my Queen Mother, Elder Nyala, an opportunity to give closing reflections for the village. So we might have time for maybe about 10 minutes for a couple of questions, please, Michael. And,
yes. Would you like me to ask my questions or questions that have come up through VChat?
Let's check and see if there's been any questions that's moved from the Facebook into this space. And I believe that our dear sister Sharon has been checking that. And I also want to note that Dr. Mitchell's been putting her contact information in the chat room, and we can invite any of the participants to do the same. And our Zoom team will move that information over to Facebook as well. So any questions from Facebook? Okay, so Helen said there's none from no questions from Facebook quite yet. However, we do want to give a shout out. There's been a plethora of endorsements, both from the chat room and Zoom, as well as in Facebook, where the community is saying thank you again for the breadth of information and depth of information. Any questions for someone here on Zoom? If so, please, at the bottom of your panel, you'll see something that says reactions. And you can click on it. If you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand and we can bring you into the verbal space. Any questions from any of our attendees on Zoom? Okay.
I'd like to add something if possible.
Yes, and then we have a question that's coming in from Art Harris, so we can do that. Yes, Mama Maria, please.
Yes, I certainly appreciate the information that all panelists have given, and particularly Dr. Griffin and Sister Carla. I don't know if it's doctor or not, but one of the things that in my work, as she talked about her hoodoo grandmother, as you know, I'm a practitioner of the Akan tradition, that when she said that the earth has provided us everything that we need, we have to understand that we stand as spirit. And so therefore we did not come to this earth unprepared to deal with anything that they throw at us. And they've been throwing it at us ever since we've been in contact with them. So that we must trust that we have within us the ability to heal. And in addition to the herbs that she talks about, we also need to understand that we have to pull the power from within. That we have had some ruptures in our intergenerational transmissions that have to be repaired. And that is our immune system. We have been blessed to have this melanin on the outside and the inside, and we must fortify it with the nutrients, the vitamins, all of those things that feed us, instead of continuing to eat the diseased foods that have been given to us. So yes, I'm a vegan. My children have never been vaccinated, except my oldest one that was in my ignorance. They are now my baby is 41 years old. His children have never been vaccinated. They have gone through school, through college, to grad school. I understand the power of understanding the power I have. And that is something I'd like for me to share with you. That Spirit has told me that we will be victorious, but not if we continue to be victims of a system that is only intended to create genocide against us. And we must open our eyes, our ears, and use what is necessary. So for the outside, I'd like to add, in addition to what we put inside, we must use shea butter on our skin. Pure shea butter, not the mixed kind that comes out of China and place. Pure shea butter on our skin, just like our parents used to put that Vaseline, which is not healthy, all over us to protect us. Shea butter will do that. In addition to the ginger, which is utmost important, there is also the elderberry. We also have hibiscus leaves, which we know from sorrels, and the bitters that come from the Caribbean and Africa. Why are we not asking, what have the Africans done to keep this virus from spreading? They've used what they always use. More people die of malaria, more children die of malaria in Africa than any other disease. And what they did is they understood and they told Bill Gates to take your vaccine back and give it to your own people.
Thank
and
you,
they
Maria.
nature, and I'm sorry, they took nature and used that to address this. And so they're walking around as normal, except up in the north and down in the south where they've been infiltrated.
May I speak?
Absolutely, Dr. Griffin, but maybe if I pose one of the questions that you may be able to sort of take a first leap at that, just to kind of make sure we do have an opportunity for the village to bring its questions in. So there are two here. The first one is, what, if any, thoughts or recommendations might there be for those who've already taken the vaccine in terms of what, if anything, they might want to be looking out for? And then the second question is questions about other resources for research around to learn more information about COVID-19 in Black people and how to discern if they should be taking the test or not.
Thank you. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Combo, I thank you so much. The truth is, we can now validate. We do have the technology to put natural remedies, and through artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can drill down on power studies so that we can, and it is being done right now, in fact. Many of the things that we heretofore, it took us a long time to know worked, we knew worked, we're now actually validating that it works. And I'm a big believer in prevention and natural remedies. They've been there for us. So I'm not the type of person that gets a head stuck in sand when we know we've done this. These pandemics have been here before, Dr. Thomas. How did we live before? We have always lived. So the thing is that I think the mistake that we made is that we went solely in one branch of medicine. And that branch of medicine, I'm not denigrating that branch of medicine. It has its pluses and it has its minuses. I'm just saying that we have to have our full array of how we care for ourselves on the table. For those who've taken the vaccine, same, prevention, diet, those natural remedies, and an aspirin if you need to take it. So that's what we're saying here today, because if we don't, then we'll be led down a path again, right? And we don't want to be led down a path again. Right? We just, and you know, we just need to get the data. Now that we have data analytics, now that we have machine learning, we need to empower ourselves to be there at the table, to be able to understand it, and to be able to count, just like anyone else, with our God-given innate abilities to do so.
Can I respond a little bit, Dr. Jackson?
Absolutely, please do. I'm trying to support you, Michael. So if you want to jump back in, you're welcome to. But I know it's a lot of traffic going back and
No,
forth.
I just kind of feel like with the comments that, you know, I hope that with my background in basic science that I wasn't perceived to be adversarial.
Not at all. I think they've been appreciating, like I said, many folks are both in Facebook and on Zoom. So forgive me for interrupting. I just want to clarify. They have appreciated the wealth and breadth of information so that our communities can make their own decisions. We as Black people can embrace multiple views and perspectives and think critically and be self-determined.
So I think one of the things is that I don't think there's nothing that says that you have to reject the natural and accept the allopathic or vice versa. I think that we are complex enough as a people to look at the allopathic and to look at the naturopathic. I mean, obviously, if somebody's having an acute problem, you know, the naturopathic may not work fast enough, right? But if they have a chronic issue, then the naturopathic may be a lot better, right? So for me, before I studied microbiology and I got my PhD, my bachelor's degree was in nutritional sciences. This right here, I'm actually drinking some juice that my wife made, which is cucumber, celery, beet, and green apple. So I think it's completely possible to kind of embrace both worlds, right? And as a matter of fact, Dr. Griffin talked about Arizona Integrative Medicine Center, and the person who's in charge of that is Dr. Andrew Weil. He actually took the vaccine himself, right? And he's a huge proponent of naturopathic medicine, you know? So I would just like to add that, you know, let's, as a community, well, not let's, but I guess for me, how I look at it is, you know, again, I was interested in nutrition. For whatever reason, you know, the universe led me to develop this passion for microbiology and genetics, and I pursued it. And I didn't reject the natural. But I do also know that from those studies, there's a lot of stuff going on at the molecular level, the cellular level, that we don't know. As Dr. Dr. Carla Mitchell, she talked about, you know, the herbs and the naturopathic approach. You know, yes, they are working, but wouldn't it be better if we knew how they're affecting the B cells, how they're affecting the T cells? What are they doing to the epigenetics of the B cells and the T cells? So if we don't kind of combine both approaches, then we won't actually be able to, I don't want to say validate, because if I say validate only through cellular and molecular biology, then that's kind of putting down the previous observations. But I'm saying we actually expand our knowledge of how those approaches can help promote health. So that's kind of all I would say about that. And lastly, I would say that I think STEM education is so very important. And I think we have been dealing with a time of anti-intellectualism in the country that's not only affecting the Black community, but it's affecting America in general. And I think we want to encourage our kids to pursue STEM education, right? And our not the adults as well, to look into biology, look into microbiology, look into genetics. What can you learn about this stuff? Don't reject it, but try to find some basic information about it and connect some of the puzzles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not looked at something that is adversarial, that we have to kind of reject because we've been abused by it, right? So as the country moves forward in the next 20 to 50 years, and we have things like tissue engineering and organ engineering and synthetic biology, it's my hope that we have African-American kids pursuing this stuff while they're also learning and respecting the things from our past, the nutrition, the herbs, learn about that and learn the things that are going to be happening going forward. Because if we don't have Black youth being represented in biotechnology and STEM engineering and tissue engineering, we run the risk of that type of abuse happening again.
Okay.
So I think
Thank you.
a integrative view between the natural, the cellular, the molecular biology, and the genetics is really timely right now.
And the data analytics
Right.
and
One
the
other-
machine learning.
Right. So clearly there's a lot of buzz in the Facebook, I'm being told, and a lot of buzz in our Zoom here and that we're having now. So clearly we started something. We may need to kind of come back with a part two. But one last question that any one of the panelists may want to answer. I'm going to squeeze them both together before I turn this back over to Michael so he can invite Mama Queen and Yala to speak. So the question is, does anyone on the panel know about blood biology? And then the second one I'm squeezing in is any recommendations for how to deal with the requirements to be vaccinated in order to travel?
Well, blood biology, I'll say that's a very broad topic, because that includes your red blood cells, it includes your serum and all of the proteins that are in your serum. It includes your white blood cells as well. And then you have the genetics and the epigenetics that control all of those things. So I would say that we might need a little bit more specific question on that.
Dr. Thompson, if I may, I believe the question is Black biology.
Biology, Black terrorism.
Black
Black biology is Black terrorism. That's a whole different concept.
Well, if you're talking about, I think there's some questions right now, and it's pretty clear to a lot of the biologists and the geneticists about the whole construct of race, whether or not you can actually trace race to the gene level, right? We know that it's a construct that promoted slavery and all of that, right? So even though I'm a scientist, when I went to Howard undergrad, I took psychology of the Black experience with Wade Boykin. I took psychology of race and racism with Jules Harrell. They were two of my favorite classes. So I took all of that into my scientific studies as well. So as far as Black biology, I mean, I think that is something that is really being discussed right now as to whether or not you really have a cellular molecular basis for race, even though there are genetic differences between ethnic groups.
Thank you. And then Dr. Mitchell, last comment, and then Michael, please take it back because we are running out of time. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Thompson, it was not my intention to create a divide. That's not my intention. And I am very much an advocate for or I celebrate trauma surgeons and things like that, because there are some things that natural medicine just cannot do. And so if I gave you that impression, I apologize, because that's not my intention. And also, I just want to say that one of the things that I think a work group needs to be formed out of this discussion, because there's absolutely a place for identifying and get to the bottom of your inquiry. You have a great scientific mind, and I love the questions that you raise. But the other part of it too is that it would be ideal, in an ideal world, or my ideal world, siloing care and siloing the dissection of disease and illness would stop. Because at the end of the day, we all have the same parts, and they're designed to function in a perfection that they were created to function.
Yeah.
So to continue.
Really quick, I would say that that's an allopathic medicine issue, right? And like I already said, I think that I see a place for allopathic and naturopathic.
Yeah.
At the same time, I see the necessity for studying things in silos. So, for example, when you have people that are studying to get a PhD in biology, not everybody's going to have the same expertise that I have as it pertains to bacteria and viruses, and there is use for that in some time, right? In time like this. And the same can be said for somebody that did their PhD in cancer biology. So I think, but on the other hand, you have interdisciplinary research that's actually really, really necessary as well.
Okay. So what I would suggest, and I agree with you, but what I was suggesting is that perhaps maybe there's a work group that needs to be formed, because I think in practice, silos are advocated, but in application, it's not necessary.
Okay, I mean, I disagree.
Yeah.
So that's fine. We can discuss the work group.
Well, I'll help out. As the president of the Association of Black Psychologists, I'm going to accept the invitation to reach out to this panelist and others about how to come up with a position paper that synchronizes these multiple voices into one space, sort of replicating what we have here. But I'm really trying to give it back to you, Michael. So please take it now and wave in our elder.
Yes. I would like to say thank you to all the presenters that spoke today, and everybody who is watching from Facebook Live and on Zoom. With that, I would like to invite Scholar Elder Cooper to give us some words of wisdom on this afternoon.
My words of wisdom they're so large at this point, because today in this particular panel has been so informative. It has really brought us to a place for renewal, in that when we come to an Mbongi, we have questions and we want healing for those questions. This session has really done a lot for us in relation to this vaccine, which is an urgent problem and issue that we are looking at this time. I would have to say that if I had 5 fingers, it would have to be one of the major ones that we needed to discuss, and to see where we are and where we need to go as a people, because that's what we're looking for. What is the direction that we get from our village on this issue? First of all, Dr. Thompson, I really would like to thank you so very much for bringing us the basics on exactly what these vaccines are, the fact that there are so many of them, and that they're out there and they're available, what they do, what they don't do, what they contain, what they don't contain. Also, Dr. Cabone, dear Maria, my dear sister, it was so important that you brought to us our memories so that we know what we can do about it. If we don't realize what's going on in the past, all the experimentation, all the things that have been done to us, we would really be blinded by that. I was really caught by a recent quotation that I saw when I was looking up some of the things related to the vaccine, that one of the researchers at Johns Hopkins said, oh, for sure we should use this thing that CDC has put out called the Social Vulnerability Index. Are people familiar with that?
Yes.
CDC has an index that says, okay, these are the people who are going to be very vulnerable in terms of health practices. And of course, Black people are number 1 on that list. What this researcher said was, Black people are the canaries in the COVID-19 coal mine. That is so significant. The canary is what they put into the coal mine to see if there's poisonous gas and whether or not it's safe for uh, the people who dig in the mines to go in. When the canary dies, then people step back. We do not want to be the canary in the
No, no.
COVID-19 coal mine. We, and I have to say, for myself, I have so many questions still because I am now 78 years old. Well, first of all, I'm Black. I'm 78 years old. I have diabetes. I experience hypertension. I have a COVID, what's that blue thing? Uh, Cobalt. I have cobalt allergy.
Mm.
And I am at the point in my life where it is really important to me to not put anything into my body that would hinder me further, that would decrease the amount of health and energy that I have. So I'm looking at this vaccine thing, okay? So in Illinois, I would be in the 1B group, which now they are making it 65 plus. It was 75 plus. I am not racing out to the corner. The information that you are sharing with me today is helping even more. So we are really at the point. When I look at the other information that we received today, certainly my wonderful associate from the past, Dr. Griffin, who acknowledges that at some point in his career, in his development, that I was one of the people there. That really helps to bring us in a kind of multi-generational um, multi-generational perspective, because in this session, as well as in our other sessions within these Mbongis, we have really learned from not only our ancestral links and wisdoms, but also from the young people who we help to bring along, who are now being able to bring us even more information. So I really want to acknowledge Dr. Griffin, and I'm hoping that Madam President, that we will look into what to do, whether we will have a work group around this issue with many of our panelists. Okay, and then Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Carla Mitchell, thank you so much for bringing us the health thing, because where we go from here, each day we need to go from what is in our house and in our place, what is available to us among our natural foods, our natural healing processes, and to really, we have to do that piece first. When we do that, then we can see what else we need and where else we need to interact with that. Okay, and Dr. Cook, Vincent, I'm so sorry that technical problems with the Zoom. I wasn't on to hear your leading comments. So I know what they were, that they were authentic and they were instructive and they were helpful. The biggest thing that we have to realize is our own fears about this virus. And we need to be able to have truth, fact, and data to be able to be able to combat this virus. So that as we look forward to our own renewal in this process and our own healing, that we do it in a way that recognizes indeed that we are a village, that we are family, and our concern should be for us as Black people for our family. I I only want to add one more piece from the ancestors, and that is our ancestor, Dr. Joseph L. White, who would say, keep the faith. So I say Asante Sante, Asante Sana, Madam President, for allowing me to have this little voice in this session. Asante Sana.
Was a gift.
Very sana, Elder.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Whew, any closing remarks from you, Michael, as serving as the moderator today? And then I'll close us out.
I have come to find that there's some work I need to do. I need to do a lot of research and in regards to the history, so I can go out and continue to speak the history to truth, to power, because there's a lot of things that was touched on that I myself didn't know. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, let me just be clear and model for you. I'm a continual learner of African wisdom and science because each time we bring the family together, I learn a little bit more. I want to appreciate you and each of our presenters and the leadership of our GA chair, Madam Dr. Tiffany Porter, for her organizational skills in this. I am going to make the assumption that as our guests accepted the invitation to be here today, they may also accept the invitation to, in fact, do a work group so that ABSI can put a position paper out on this to continue to disseminate information. This morning's Mbongi, our dear Baba Naeem Akbar reminded us to be proactive and not reactive. So in that spirit, recognizing the insurrection that happened a week ago and the insurrection that will be happening over the next few days as we approach this inauguration, the Association of Black Psychologists will be hosting its virtual Sawabono Healing Circles again for January 19th, 20th, and 21st. We have posted these on our website and social media. These are meant to be safe, trusting Black spaces for you to be able to sort of call in, share where you are, be loved up and grounded again in our cultural wisdom. Nana Linda James Myers and Baba Wade Nobles brought to us again the concept of Zola that comes to us through the teachings of Baba Fukia, as I learned this, with Zola being a Kakongo term, meaning activating love, protecting love, peace and tranquility. So in that vein, we as an association have conceptualized ourselves in this idea of Zola up on we since the COVID hit. So these Mbongis are examples of that, and Zoling up on we and protecting our communities by arming them with information. And the Sawabono circles are part of that as well too. So that while the madness is going on out there, that our people can be intentional in being in Black love and Black joy together and not be distracted by that madness or be further succumb to psychic terrorism, because as that goes on, it enters our spirit as if we should be afraid or worried about something. This is our time to stay in self-determination. I also want to appreciate my Zoom team who are placing the handouts both here in the chat room and also on Facebook. We have a handout that we've been doing for the association, which lists our, not only the Sawabono circles, but as well our emotional emancipation circles, which is something that we have been doing in collaboration with the Community Healing Network as their vision, our execution, our collaboration moving forward. So I want a beautiful shout out in recognition for Sister Enola Air. And then lastly, to say as well, please visit our website because we'll have most of this new information there for you. But the Association of Black Psychologists wants to say thank you, Asante Sana, Marisa Pa, for everyone for being here. Stay Black, stay strong, love in the Black joy, Zola up on one another, and peace and blessings to each and every one of you. I am so excited to be the president right now because our people are doing it and they're doing it good.
Thank you, everyone. This is amazing.